This paper was presented at the JCT Traffic Signal Symposium 2025. Video coverage of this paper is provided by Highways News and sponsored by Mobius Networks, AGD, Smart Micro UK, TRL Software, Traffic Group Signals, AD Electronics, and 4-Way Consulting.
Morning, folks. Having seen all this huge data-driven stuff, suddenly I'm onto something where I had to fiddle around with a spreadsheet, so it's rather less showbiz. So yeah, I found myself having to estimate the capacity of a pedestrian crossing. Okay. So I'll have a quick look at the situation, and I'll go into some of the nuts and bolts of the calculation, but not too much. So why did I even have to bother? So we had an existing layout of a dual puffin with a flanking pedestrian underpass, and there was a proposed scheme to fill in the underpass because that was the only way you could have space for a two-way cycleway, and the underpass didn't have the vertical dimensions to let you satisfactorily use it for cycles. So you had this really intense period of demand. So within 15 minutes, you had something like 280 people wanting to cross in one direction. And with the underpass, lots of those were using it. They were taking that option because this was an urban dual carriageway. So it turned out to be more attractive to be using the underpass. And a query came in, with all these users, is the new design going to cope? The advantage being that the proposal was going to get rid of the stagger, so you were crossing the road in one movement. You were going through an island, but you're not intended to stop there. So you kind of look around for the advice that's available, because you've got an email you've got to answer. And chapter 6 tells you that for every 125 people per hour, on top of more than 600 people per hour, recommends you add ½ metre to your 2.4 metre wide crossing. So all of those of you who know where your 500 millimetre square tactile paving units are for your 2.9 metre wide crossing. I've not done one, but maybe you have, I don't know. But it did at least say you've got to widen it a bit if you've got, say, 725 people an hour. I had a look at the TfL model auditing process. That's more concerned on the quality of data and making sure we're comparing apples with apples, so using the same units. That didn't really help me in this case. And the TfL pedestrian comfort guidance, well, that was more concerned with how far away crossings are from each other. If you've got a busy area, you want to provide people with more opportunities to cross, to make them feel like they actually can cross. They don't have to have some massive trek to find a crossing point. So had to do a first principles calculation. So it was, how much room does a person take up? And after an internet search where it said, well, on a subway train, they can be really quite tightly packed. I didn't think it was probably going to get like that, but we saw from the Kirklees and Starling Technologies presentation yesterday, people can really pack in when they need to. But we came up with this value of 0.77 metre square. That's kind of room for a person. You can actually fit 3.6 people across your 2.8 metre wide crossing, because that was what was in the design. But I wanted people to be able to chuck rocks at the calculation. And so instead of assuming 3.6 was, I don't know, a child or something, I just rounded it down to 3 people. And then it's, well, how far can a person cross during the green? Now, the invitation to cross period is not to get you curb to curb. I think the wording is to let you establish yourself on the crossing. And with a 1.2 meters per second walking speed, and that is a weakness, I'll admit that, you can get 10.8 meters. And there were some rounding errors because I did the calculation last night, and actually you can just about get 14 people across, but to be confident and for some robustness, this rank of 13 people, or 13 ranks of these 13 of these 3-row ranks can get onto the crossing during your pedestrian green. So that's 39 people. But what if they're facing the same number in the other direction? We had a bit of a 2/3 to 1/3 split in terms of demand. So you can't guarantee that you've got 3 ranks facing 3 ranks. So we basically split it. And it turned out that per cycle, because this was the thing, it was how many people you're dealing with per cycle, you could get 26 in one direction and 13 in the other. And for the data we had, because we had lots of delicious data from a Viva City count, that, yeah, we could theoretically deal with it. So even say when that gets a bit high in this column, this has actually become the dominant movement. So we thought that in these peaks of demand, and so it was like the Thursday in 15 minutes building up to 4 o'clock, and then a sample Thursday morning, the busiest point, and then the busiest point on a Saturday. Looks like it would take it. So weaknesses in the calculation, as I said earlier, the walking speed. And some locations I've used 1 meter per second rather than 1.2 meters a second, because I think there was some information that came out a couple of years ago that a lot of people were failing to achieve 1.2 meters a second. If you're in a crowd, can you actually walk at 1.2 meters a second? I think I dealt with the friction side of things by having by just assuming you'd have 2/3 in one direction, 1/3 in the other, so it wasn't a wall of people facing another wall of people. I didn't include anything where people might be crossing during the clearance periods, because officially you're not supposed to be doing that. And if you were trying to encourage, because lots of the users were school children or sixth form college students, you don't want to be encouraging them officially to be crossing against the green man. I also thought maybe the shape of the queue wasn't reasonable. I had this sort of phalanx in the earlier images, and that was my calculation, but they're probably more likely to queue like a funnel, or again, as we saw from the Kirklees and Starling Technologies presentation yesterday, more likely to be a blob. So that was a way where my calculation was perhaps, well, less realistic, because if you've ever been out of a house, you'll know that's more how people queue. Had some site-specific factors that made this perhaps a unique calculation. The desire lines were really fixed, because most of the time, if you're progressing along a street, you're either going along there or along there, and occasionally you have a need to cross. In this situation, you kind of had stub-end roads either side, and people were definitely crossing in that direction. There wasn't much demand to go in this direction. In fact, I think on one of them you ran out of footway anyway, so there wasn't a demand to do that. The other part was that the subway was perfectly aligned with the desire line. So sometimes you get to a pedestrian subway and you have to turn 90 degrees to the direction of travel you want to go. You have to go down 90 degrees again to go under the road. You might even have to go another ramp down to get to the desired depth, and then you've got to do the same again to get back up. But this one, you went down the ramp in the direction you wanted to go, you went under the road in the direction you wanted to go, and you came up in the direction you wanted to go. And also, the subway must have been in great nick because people were using it. It wasn't the stereotypical lake of needles and wee that you might sometimes you might expect to encounter. Again, there was no competition sort of perpendicular to your main direction of pedestrian travel. So that's something I think that's fairly unique to that site. I was wondering how the advice stood up. It turned out to be quite accurate, I think, because my 2.8 metre wide crossing, round about 1,000 people as a minimum, assuming total usage of the green time, and a high point of sort of 2,200 people. That's assuming that there weren't any traffic green extensions, because that was maximum cycle time and that was minimum cycle time within an hour. And that's never going to happen. If that's what happens, why have you even got traffic signals there? It's zebra crossing or a very low trafficked area. But with, say, a typical crossing, 2.4 metres wide, you could move about 720 people. And so it was talking about 725 from the advice, assuming everything runs to maximum. So it's looking actually very positive. It was the intense 15-minute period that was the challenge at this one, where you were having to move just under half of that hourly rate, but in a quarter of the time. So there could be some potential uses. Now that's fairly obvious, because you've got, you could be planning a roadwork, sorry, when you do your scheme, because show the design would work, but when you're building this thing and filling in the subway, you've got to deal with all those people still.
So yeah, you could do your construction at a time when you're not going to be expecting so many school students. You might have some event management you could do. Say if you're outside, not necessarily for a school, but there might be a theatre, there might be, I don't know, a bus station or a railway station. It might help you refine your design, because I found that you've got the pedestrian green and the width of your crossing are what gives you your capacity. And if you don't have one, perhaps you can increase the other, because that gets people across. Also, knowing how your pedestrians are behaving, you can be more serious about active travel, because if, say, 240 people crossing a road in a 15-minute period, if you're not being serious about that, Active Travel England might be having some words with you. And I thought it was a way of potentially justifying increasing crossing green, because most of the time we just put something in, because you put a crossing in and that'll help people cross, and you don't really analyse it any further. But say the case for extendable crossing green, which is quite rare, really. Some conclusions, and they're all pretty obvious. So crossing would cope, from the design my colleagues came up with. The advice was actually quite accurate, so that was encouraging. And it's the width between the stud markings and the invitation to cross duration that are vital to how these crossings perform. I thought if you added further technology, say curbside detection or some form of detection to when there are large numbers of pedestrians and have an intervention for that, perhaps mover or a form of adaptive control to shift traffic. And also, I was really quite relieved. So the answer to the email eventually was positive. Yes, it would work. So, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I'm sure the audience will agree with me that that was an excellent sort of continuation of the Huddersfield tsunami presentation of yesterday. They went really well together. So, do we have a question? Yeah, you had the last one, so okay. Sorry about that. You'll have to catch him in the break.
Hi there, Robert Mansell, Dumfries and Galloway. I was just wondering, what was the cycle time or the sort of vehicle green time you were working with your calculation?
It was something like, I think we had perhaps in the peak 30 seconds for traffic, and I think the cycle time overall for the proposed site was almost probably in the region of 60 seconds, which is actually quite high for a crossing, but you had a 9-second invitation to cross period, and then because of the distance to cross, your clearance periods could be quite high, and you had sort of cycle to traffic into greens that would have been, I think they were I think they're about 7 seconds. So you're probably going to do that anyway, even if you didn't use any of the clearance period. So it was probably, I think maybe it was about, it's either 58 or 62 or something like that. I think it says in the paper. But
Thank you. You actually feel so good at this. He's given 1 minute back into the programme, so I will take one more question. I'm really squinting with someone who's not Mark. Look, not Mark. Yeah, sorry, Mark, but yeah, you could definitely. You've got one for the next one.
Hi, Ashley Newnham from Unix Traffic. Was there a pressure on you not to widen the crossing just to be on the safe side?
there were sort of building lines that constrained you widening in any direction, because the point of the proposed scheme was to put in cycle facilities sort of between the stub end roads each side. And so you couldn't go too far south, because otherwise you were in a shop, and if you went too far north you were in a shop, or it would have sort of opened out and then had to come back in again. And so yeah, the obvious conclusion is, well, couldn't you just done a 5 metre wide toucan or something? But the point was to try and get a segregated cycleway, because I don't know, some pedestrians think cyclists want to kill them. They've not even met them at that point. So, yeah, and some cyclists don't behave in a responsible fashion. I say that as someone who cycle commutes when I'm in Bristol. So, but I try to be responsible. But yeah.
Thank you. I do believe that every single cyclist in London tries to kill me, but hey, I'm just not a very popular person.
Maybe you've been there a while. I don't know.
Yeah. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
And I'm sure you'll be around if people want to ask you further questions later.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Phil.